everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is Clifford Winston, economist and author of the upcoming book, Market Corrections, Not Government Interventions, A Path to Improve the U.S. Economy. Clifford, thank you so much for joining me once again.
Nice to be here. Good talking to you again.
Last week, there were reports that President Trump was thinking about firing the chair of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell. Trump later addressed that reported plan, saying that it was highly unlikely that he would fire Powell, quote, unless he has to leave for fraud. So what do you make of those reports that he was even mulling this over? And what do you make of that caveat there? Probably won't fire him unless there's fraud involved.
Right. So given what we're going to be talking about, let me just take this from a somewhat bigger perspective in terms of, what is Trump saying that he may fire the head of the Federal Reserve, say about his views about government? Okay. In other words, one thing could be that, no, I don't believe that the government should even be in charge of the Federal Reserve, that the private sector should print money and they should decide who gets it in terms of loaning it out, right? What do we even have the government involved in this? That could be one perspective. It's not a popular one, and I don't think anybody's advocating, but it starts our thinking about it. Alternatively, you can say, okay, no, the Federal Reserve should be in charge of interest rates and loaning money to the member banks, so on and so forth. But, we need to have them do it better in some way that really isn't defined, because after all, the Federal Reserve draws on many people to help them in making their decisions. So when Trump starts talking about firing the head of the Fed, what really is he saying? Is he saying, well, I want to just change how we do monetary policy in the United States and rely more on the private sector, or do I want to reform it? And it's hard to say that he really cares about either of those things as much as he just doesn't like doing it the way the Fed chairman's doing it. So it starts to open the question, does he really have a nihilistic approach to government? That is, I don't really believe in government. I don't believe in the private sector. I just believe in doing it my way. And I think that is what's raising concerns about him saying that he wants to fire Chairman Powell.
And we're going to get into what you call a nihilistic approach to government in a little bit. But I think there are two separate questions when you're talking about the potential for the president to fire the chair of the Fed, because the Fed is by nature nonpartisan. So A, what type of precedent would this send, say a president fire the chair of the Fed? And B, this is separately, do you think Jerome Powell is doing a good job as chair of the Fed? So let's talk about the first part of that question. What message is this sending?
A terrible message. It'll basically just say that, there's really no reason to have a long-term view of monetary policy. It basically is going to go at the whims of the president, and all the things that you want in monetary policy, certainty, predictability in terms of what's happening, at least so that you can make plans for investments and so on and so forth, are out the window because they can change at the president's whim. So it's a very dangerous policy when you're dealing with so many variables that depend on expectations, interest rates, exchange rates, all sorts of assets, where you have to look to the future, you have to have some sense about what's going to be going on, and then you make your decisions accordingly. If you have no confidence in what's going on in the future, you're just going to sort of fold up business and say, I'm going to wait. I'm too concerned to spend. I'm too concerned to invest. So basically, it could freeze the economy if we really get the sense that all we're going to be doing is thinking about the short term.
And I'm sure, let's say you're Republican and let's say you don't think Fed Chair Powell is doing that good of a job, but would you want a Fed chair that kowtows to the president's whim? Would you want someone, because then a Democrat will eventually be president again in this country, I'm sure. And then would that Fed chair be concerned then that, oh, this president could fire me too because it's happened before to Powell or it's happened before to another guy? I mean, what do you make of that?
Exactly. No, this is an area where there should not be any political division, because either party can be vulnerable. And even somebody who's, quote, their own party could decide, well, no, I'm not going to do this. And after the fifth time he has to change what he's doing in less than a few months, then he's saying, no, I'm going to do things my way. And it'll cause a lot of chaos. So I don't really see any intellectual argument for this. And I'm not even clear that anybody's making it. I mean, you can say, I don't like the job that Chairman Powell is doing, but what's your standard, right? I mean, this is a problem that we've been dealing with effectively for centuries in the sense of what is the optimal interest rate? No one knows the answer to that. And there are some very smart people who've gotten Nobel Prizes, for their answer, but it's not a definitive answer. And even today in the Times, you saw op-ed by both Bernanke, who did win a Nobel Prize, and Janet Yellen, who's a first-rate economist, is saying, look, these are hard problems. We can make mistakes, but you really have to let us sort this out. And I think that's just the wide view of virtually all economists and people who are seriously thinking about this. I think that this is one of the riskiest things that Trump has been playing with. Because I said, the implications go way beyond what he thinks they go beyond. It's not just our budgetary issues and how much debt we're going to pay back. This is going to affect the global economy if you start messing around with the credibility of our monetary policy.
I mean, dive a little deeper here and paint that picture. What does the global economy look like should a president boot out the Fed chair?
All right, so look at the other things that are affected. Okay, what about exchange rates? Right, interest rates then are going to be cut all of a sudden down to what, 1% that Trump wants. I don't know where he got that number, but let's just go with it. And so exchange rates are going to fall in the US. And people say, oh, great. But what does that mean? It means that, yes, our exports are cheaper, but our imports are a lot more expensive. And so you're going to get inflationary pressures there. Then you're going to say, well, at least we can buy our domestic products. Sure, but you don't think people are going to raise prices? Once all of a sudden people start switching away from French wine to California wine in a much bigger way than they've done in the past, they're going to raise their prices. So you're going to get all these inflationary pressures, right? And then you're going to say, oh, I've got to raise interest rates again, but I just cut them, right? I mean, that's the kind of example that you have that once you start thinking about the broader global economy.
And you talked about this, what you called nihilistic approach to President Trump has to policy, to perhaps government. You wrote about that earlier about Trump's big, beautiful bill. You said it shows, quote, Trump's anti-government but not pro-market approach to policymaking. It's nihilistic and does not bode well for the nation's material quality of life. Talk to us a little bit about what you mean there.
Okay, so again, what I think all economists have been trying to do is trying to figure out what is it that really drives Trump? Because he's very unusual. We've not really had a president like this that either clearly believes in markets or clearly believes in what we would call efficient government policy reform. That is, you recognize that government has flaws, but you believe that government can play a constructive role, and it just needs to be told the right thing to do, and you as president are going to do that. The problem that I think we've been having with Trump is we can't figure out where he stands. He goes ahead with this major bill and talks about deregulation. Now, that has meant something to us for several decades under many presidents. Deregulation means removing regulations on entering an industry, exiting an industry, and pricing in the industry. The government sets all that. And when we deregulate industry, like we did with airlines, railroads, natural gas, many things, that's what we're thinking about economic deregulation. And every president up to Trump did something of that sort. And then you add that a form of deregulation with free trade. Other presidents, Obama, Clinton, moved in that direction. Okay, Trump has not done that in anything. And he's had the opportunity to do it. He could have deregulated ocean transportation. and gotten rid of the Jones Act, which he seriously considered doing, but he decided not to do it in the end. He can do the same thing in international airline transportation. We do not allow foreign airlines to serve American routes, which could be a source of competition. It also could make international travel easier because you could have seamless travel. In other words, you could use an American carrier all the way to Europe and including connecting flights. That could be deregulated, but we don't have that. So it's hard to point to deregulation. Yet he then says, we're going to deregulate environmental policies. I think it's a wrong use of the term, but let's go with it and say we're going to get rid of subsidies for electric vehicles. Okay. But that gets us on, all right, let's think about efficient government policy reform. I agree with Trump on that. I would too like to get rid of subsidies for electric vehicles because they're a bad, inefficient policy for trying to encourage purchases of electric vehicles. In other words, what you really want to do is discourage people who are doing the polluting, right? Buy cars that obviously are more fuel efficient and don't emit as much pollutants, and ideally even getting some people to switch to electric vehicles. Charge them a tax, disincentivize people for doing that, and raise money that you could use for the deficit instead of spending government money and subsidies to reward people for buying EVs. So that would be an efficient policy, but he's not even doing that. So where is he on this? Well, what about markets? Who would be the real major competitor to the US to stimulate market competition? The Chinese. Chinese have the largest share of electric vehicle sales in the world. Let them compete, but let them compete in the US. This is what we did with the Japanese in the 80s when they came and built plants here and basically transformed the industry with fuel efficient vehicles that the public liked. Same idea. Chinese invite them, so to speak, let them build plants and compete here. There'll be conditions. They can't get subsidies from the Chinese government to give them a competitive advantage over the domestic firms. They're going to have to meet security terms of the government. And of course, by building them here, they'll be using American workers. All right. Once we have that, we compete with them. This is going to lead to an increase in sales of EVs, no question about it, and hopefully help the industry to become more competitive. You think Trump wants that? No way. So what does he really believe in? Hard to say. Not markets, that's for sure. And he doesn't even believe in efficient government reform. So that's where I come out on this and say, this is just nihilistic.
So what you're saying, it's anti-government but not pro-market approach. Once again, what is the impact of that on the global economy?
Makes things very chaotic. And I think that's exactly how people are reacting. They just don't know what to make of this guy. And it makes things very difficult to plan. It makes it very difficult to approach him. But, somehow people are rolling with it. The stock market's doing very well. I can't sort of say that, all this chaos is showing up somewhere in the stock market or any other financial market yet. But I think that's what our concern is yet. It's becoming increasingly clear that it's very hard to figure out where Trump is coming from. There's lots of reasons to have insecurities about what this world's going to be. And of course, even just throwing out these various things that he's doing, is very, let's say, destabilizing. And of course, you don't know when he's going to go back to things. Like, what happened to our invasion of Greenland? What happened to our invasion of Canada? When's that coming back, right? So, there's sort of this strange thought of the day. And maybe people are just getting used to it and say, look, don't take any of this seriously. We're going to do what we do. And thus far, the market is suggesting that's exactly what they're doing. But if he does some of these things, it's going to be scary. So we'll just have to hold on. But it's just not the way that a president really should be trying to guide an economy.
I don't know how to feel talking to an economist saying, brace for impact. We haven't seen much yet, but it's to come. I mean, what do you make of when should people expect that to come? When do you think that that shoe will drop and we'll really see it in the market?
Oh, now, look, if I knew that, I wouldn't tell you.
Oh, you definitely wouldn't tell me, and yeah, you probably wouldn't be talking to me right now. You'd probably
I
be doing
wouldn't be.
something
I'd be
else.
making money. I'd be making.
Exactly.
I'd be knowing what to short in the stock market and, and making money on all this. So it's probably not a good idea ever to ask an economist to give that kind of forecast. But I think the question really is once we can get a sense of a committed path. In other words, once tariffs are locked in, once he decides once and for all who's going to be a Fed chair, he may drag this out, try to make Powell as miserable as he can, hope he quits. He won't quit, but then he picks somebody. If he picks somebody who's clearly a lackey, that's going to be a commitment, and that's going to be something that people are going to worry about. So I think at this point, there's just too much speculation, and I think the time to sort of, get a little more concerned is, okay, he's really committed to this path. He's really committed to these tariffs. They're going to be in for a while. He's really committed to having a big say in interest rate policy by the Fed because he's picked this person who's just going to say, how high should I jump when you tell me to jump? Right? It's not that kind of thing that's going to happen to give us a better sense of preparation. But look, every day is different. I mean, every day is a new day with him. So, I think we have to at this point play it out accordingly.
Clifford, you're so right. Every day truly is a new day. And as there are developments, which I'm sure there will be plenty, I hope you can come back on and break them down. Clifford Winston, thank you so much for joining me. You're welcome back anytime.
Thank you for having me. Look forward to talking again.